In professional sports, a franchise player is an athlete who is not simply the best player on their team, but one that the team can build their franchise around for the foreseeable future.
Welcome into a brand new edition of Franchise Players here on WWBG 1470 AM and WTOB 980 AM 96.7 FM. Here with you every Friday afternoon in the Triad. I'm your host, Desmond Johnson. You can catch the video version of this on the Tobacco Road Sports Radio YouTube channel. Shout out to everybody that subscribed over the past couple of months. Visit us there at youtube.com/@Tobacco Road Sports Radio. They got bumped last week. The host from the Cat Cave Carolina Panthers podcast, they'll be in the house to talk a little Carolina Panthers and a little WWE as well. And we've got Joe DeLeon from the Believe Podcast Network from the Charity Stripe. He's going to talk to us about this craziness of the college football playoff. Was Florida State hosed or was they not? So we'll get into that too. But before we do anything else, I had to bring on my man Joe Person from The Athletic. Joe, you and Dianna Russini dropped a little nugget about midway through this week on the Carolina Panthers. You can everyone can go check it out at theathletic.com. Kind of if you're a Carolina Panther fan and you read through this, it almost felt like we kind of confirmed our suspicions for what was going on over the course of this season. Now in this article, Joe, you guys kind of detail a coaching staff that just never seemed to be on the same page going all the way back to really preseason. Now that I think about it, were you and other media reporters feeling that tension among the coaching staff like throughout the year, or was it something you kind of noticed as the end was getting closer?
Well, the most obvious example was one that all of us saw was when Frank Reich gives Thomas Brown play calling duties, lets him do it for 3 games, and then takes it back. And you're just like, that's not really cool. And that's
cool.
not something you see a lot of. And so that was sort of the first tip that there was probably more going on. And I should point out too, Desmond, that the defensive staff, I've gotten no real sniff or indication that they have had these kind of dysfunctionality issues, that Ejiro Evero and his guys have really worked well together. And I think it's worth pointing out that these were guys that Ejiro knew, that he's
right.
worked with all of them, I believe, except one guy on that whole defensive staff. He worked with, well, if you remember, and back in February, I found an article last night that I did in February, and it was very much praising that the idea that Frank Reich was saying Dave Tepper really opened up his wallet so I could go get this staff, but there was a nugget in there, and it wasn't like I reported. These guys said it, but they wanted to go out and they wanted Frank Reich to get out of his comfort zone and hire guys outside of his circle. And so I think what you had happen then, Desmond, is when things started going back. Now, he had a couple guys like who you would consider like Frank guys, like Deuce Staley, he had been with in Philadelphia. Josh McCown and Deuce had a history in Philadelphia. And then the other guys in the building, not so much. And I just think what we saw was, and I think I don't know that it's unusual. Any team that goes 1-10, 1-11 to start the year, you're going to start seeing some of those clashes. But it really did play out in real time in Charlotte.
Follow him on Twitter /X, whatever the kids are calling it these days, at Joseph Person. Joseph Person from The Athletic joining us here on Franchise Players to kick off this sports-filled weekend. Talking Carolina Panthers, if you haven't read this article by him and Dianna Russini on The Athletic and you're a Carolina Panther fan and you've gone through the torture of this season, go check it out. It'll probably answer a lot of questions that you might have had about what was going on. I'm glad you touched on the fact that it feels like there was 2 different camps going on in the building, almost like old school NWO Hollywood versus NWO Wolfpack, where it's like 2 different factions, but you're under the same banner kind of. It did feel like offense, defense But then it also felt like there was division just on the offensive side, like you said, where it never made sense to me, Joe, that they would say one thing and then do another. Like the offensive line, for example. Like Frank Reich clearly knows the strength of the offensive line was downhill running. What they did the last half of last year, it's pretty much why they kept them and kept Campion on as well. But then you turn around and you don't do that. Like you intentionally not do that and do something else. And even when you're asked about it later on in the year, I know you and Vashti Hurt and a couple others that were in there were constantly asking, about this. And Frank was just clearly like, we're not a smash mouth football team, which I thought was really weird to say out loud as a football coach, that we're not this, we're trying to be something else. But he never really clearly explained what that was in terms of the identity he was trying to create. I guess I'm trying to figure out what the identity was going to be if this is continued on. Do you think there's a chance that any of these coaches on the staff remain next year? Because, they did keep Campion and Tabor from the previous.
I know. And now Tabor's the interim coach. So I'm not ruling it out. I mean, I think those guys who have good, it should be said, these guys have good coaching resumes and backgrounds. And clearly they have, over the last couple of years earned the trust of David Tepper. And so, it depends who the head coach will be. But to your point, Desmond, about this identity, it's layered and nuanced, and it's tough to get your hands around, just as you said, for fans and for media. I think it's tough for the offensive staff to get their hands around. And here, a couple of reasons why. You had Thomas Brown bringing the Rams concept of wide zone and mid zone runs, which were, as you said, very different than what the Panthers hung their hats on at the end of last season under Wills.
Yeah, we don't do that.
but here's the thing: the offensive line that they have here, that's their strength. But what did they do in free agency? They went out and got Miles Sanders, who's really more of a fit for that wide zone. Mm-hmm. Certainly more so than Deontay Freeman, who they could have brought back.
Which kind of explains why he left, because if I'm not mistaken in the timeline, he left before they signed Miles Sanders. So I assume that he was told what they were going to run, and he chose to take less money to go to Chicago.
Yeah. And then here's the other thing. I think that Frank Reich, first of all, his background was more a lot of shotgun, a lot of horizontal stretch in the pass game rather than deep shots. And they drafted a quarterback, Desmond, who'd not been under center at Alabama at all, pretty much, and wasn't comfortable under center. Like we reported in our story that Bryce Young, made it clear that he wasn't comfortable under center. So, so you had Frank and Bryce wanting to do the shotgun thing, Thomas Brown wanting to do the wide zone ran. Never identity.
I'm trying to figure out what to do with it, because it's like they're fighting each other. And this happened from the very beginning, like in preseason, where people were questioning the offense, and Frank's like, slow down. We're very vanilla right now. We're not really showing what we're going to do. They literally are doing the same thing they were doing in preseason. So it's just kind of weird. It felt like it was Frank's offense, and people were trying to push him to do other things, and he didn't want to do it. One of the things I thought that was really noticeable in this article that you guys wrote was the fact that it felt like the assistant coaches kind of figured out the hierarchy very quickly, and decided that when things weren't going the way they wanted to, they didn't go to Frank. It almost feels like they went around Frank and got messages to the owner and Scott Fitter, and then the owner would come down and be like, "Hey, why don't you do this? Why don't you do that?" I've been attacked on Twitter for the past 3 weeks because I put a tweet out one Sunday during a Panthers game where I was like, Bryce doesn't really step back in the pocket. He gets the snap and he kind of does this little 1-2 hop type thing, but he never really drops back. Yeah. And he never really climbs the ladder either, into the pocket. Now, granted, there's usually 3 dudes in his face and he can't climb the pocket, but I'm not talking about those plays. I mean the ones when he actually has a pocket and he could go up in it. he kind of, and I went back and watched film at Alabama. He was doing this there too. He was just more confident in it, where he would get it, take like a step or two back, and then he would just throw it from right there. And people were coming at me like, well, he doesn't have protection. How's he supposed to climb the pocket? Blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, well, if he doesn't have protection to climb the pocket up, why is he not taking a few steps back as soon as he gets it to give himself more room? He's not even doing that. Like, no one's even teaching him to do this. And you guys kind of pointed out in that article that there was staff members that seen this and had decided to go around Frank and tell, I guess, Fitter and Tepper is the one that tells Frank, hey, work on his footwork or whatever. And this is right around the end, like, I guess around Thanksgiving weekend, right?
Yeah, it was. And good on you for picking up on that and going back and looking at the Alabama tape. Yeah, I mean, I'm told it's pretty obvious to see it on film that he wasn't getting deep enough. And, was that an issue at the pass that besides all the issues throwing the ball, I think some in the building thought that was causing the issues in pass protection. Like, they didn't really know where he was going to be in his drops. And there were a lot of times it just felt like the pocket would kind of engulf Bryce.
Yeah.
And I think, to your point, had he been, a little deeper in the pocket, then maybe he avoids some of that. And again, I'm not excusing the offensive line play. It's been really bad. Separation from the wide receiver separation's been bad, but it all worked in lockstep. And somebody noticed this. They had said they were not going to mess with Bryce's foot, and we made this point in the article too. They were not, as a staff, the offensive staff, they collectively agreed they weren't going to. It was a lot to kind of take on, and he was going to be learning new offense. Let's not mess with his mechanics in year one. Not that pass sets are exactly, dropbacks are exactly mechanics, but you know what I'm getting at. And then in week 13, they're trying to drill this into him. So that to me was one of the most interesting things in our report.
And we didn't really see a difference, to be honest. Like, in that stretch, I didn't really notice anything different about his dropbacks or climbing or anything like that. Now, when he climbs, usually he's being chased. Like, he's getting chased out of the pocket, which is not what I'm talking about. So that's
different thing.
Completely different thing. So let's just stay on Bryce for a second. How much has this season, do you think, in your opinion, set Bryce Young back? Do you feel he's progressed in any area since week one?
Hard to point to any one thing. There was that stretch, the Miami game, the Houston game, not really the Colts game, but maybe even Detroit. There was a third one.
Yeah.
And you're starting to think, he wasn't putting up CJ Stroud numbers, but he was throwing for like 238, 240, and he just looked pretty comfortable. And you're like, okay, he might be. They might be onto something here, and we might see him by late November, December start hitting that 300 burger. But obviously it has gone the other direction, and it just wasn't a good offense. I mean, they looked at tape from Alabama, and he had he had a lot of success in RPO game there. So they kind of dabbled in that, but really never committed to that. At one point, when Reich took the offense back over, he wanted to do more no huddle, kind of hurry up, because they had seen early in the year in some of those blowout losses, Bryce kind of got into a rhythm, when it helped that the other team was in prevent. But so they've tried everything. I don't know that they've ever really hit on anything that's been super successful. Now teams are sort of starting to make an emphasis of taking Adam Thielen away. And it's crazy that a 33-year-old wideout would be the focus of their defensive game plan.
Yeah.
But we've seen Thielen kind of disappear the last 2 weeks. And, Mingo did some nice things, but nothing that made you just say, whoa, this is what we're waiting for.
I'm so glad you landed there, because that's why I'm in trouble on Twitter this week. Because I've been telling folks, I'm like, Bryce really, he hasn't had a moment to me this year, like a throw or a play or something, where when it was done, I stood up and I was like, that's why we traded up 8 spots to go to number 1 to get him, because he's a unicorn. He's different. There's something about him. he's playing okay, but I mean, he was the number 1 overall pick. We gave up the farm for him. So I don't feel like it's wrong for me to be like, at this point, especially after firing Frank Wright after 11 games or 12 games, I don't think it's wrong for me to, someone who has to, just like you, has to watch these games every week and then talk about them all week long. I don't think it's wrong to sit there and go, our expectations for Bryce should be higher. We shouldn't throw excuse after excuse after it, because that's not going to help him. Keep saying the offensive line is bad, didn't have wide receivers, blah, blah, blah. He has to have a game where he elevates the offense to some extent, because he was the number 1 overall pick. That's what you kind of expect from a number 1 overall pick, to elevate the ones around you. And honestly, I don't know if he can. And that's kind of where I'm at. I'm not throwing him out. I'm not saying he's a bust or anything by any means, because we still can't really. Dan Orlovsky said it best a couple weeks ago. We really won't know about him until like 2025. Like, we really won't, because he's going to learn a whole new offense here in like 4 months probably, and he's going to have to do this all over again. So we'll kind of see there. But quick hits before I get you out of here. Your article made me kind of feel like Scott Fitterer may not be on the hot seat that many people feel he is, because it kind of feels like all he's doing is whatever Tepper asked him to do. How can Tepper ask him to fire him or fire him when he's only doing what Tepper's asked him to do for the most part, it feels like. Do you feel like Fitterer's on a hot seat, or do you feel like he's kind of excluded from all this?
I do think his seat's very hot. But you're right. Occasionally I'll get the sense that Tepper's, Scott is a company guy. Like he, and I think sometimes it would behoove him and others to tell Tepper no. But nobody's really done that much the last couple of years. I think Ron's staff, going back to Rivera, I think they were more inclined to kind of hold their ground. But
you see what happened then. Yeah.
So I don't know. If you're asking me today, my guess would be Fitterer would not be around. But I he's gotten no assurances one way or another. That was our reporting. Others have reported that. But what I would say is, I think he's going to be around to the end of the season. There's no real benefit to get rid of him now. But it's going to be fascinating. I mean, and we hadn't really gotten into this, but in terms of who they bring in as head coach, Bill Belichick, Jim Harbaugh, they're going to do their own thing, probably. Certainly Bill will for personnel. So that would end Scott Fitterer's tenure here for sure.
I want Jim Harbaugh. I'm on record as wanting him last year. We were doing Believe in Panther podcast last year before when Wilkes was the interim, when I was like, go get Harbaugh. Like, go get, and then he called in and I was like, this is actually happening. It's going down. And then it just kind of fizzled out. I think the situation's even better for him to come in now, because now he knows he has a quarterback. Now he knows he's going to come in with a defense. I will say this for Scott Fitterer, as much as we come down on him on some of the misses in the draft and things of that sort, there's another side of this. The defense is ranked like 7th overall in yards allowed, and a lot of it was like journeymen and people he had to pick up almost off the street because of so many injuries. For the defensive staff to be able to have done what they've done, and for Fitterer to have found those players, you got to give him credit for that. So there's two sides here. So I can see why he's still here, and the season's still going on. He's still having to make transactions. So I can see that, but I also can see on Black Monday, him, taking a box out to the car. So we'll see what happens with that. Real quick, in your mind, Joe, how attractive is this head coaching job in your opinion? And is this the worst Panthers season in history? Because you've been covering this team for a long time and you've seen some pretty ugly seasons here in Charlotte. This is approaching 2001, 2010 territory. What say you? How attractive is this job? And is this the worst season in Panthers history?
Well, I think so. So let's say they end up going with a young offensive coordinator. Basically, Frank Reich was the first offensive coach, with a offensive background. In franchise history. But let's say they go that route, but with a young guy, Bobby Slowett, Ben Johnson, Brian Johnson, Frank Smith, somebody like that. But first of all, Ben Johnson's going to, I think, have better offers. And by better, I mean the Chargers with Justin Herbert.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's the sleeping giant, like, to me. If you're an offensive guy, you want to go to LA and coach Justin Herbert.
Yeah, that's a good point.
And, could you make, would one of these guys look at Bryce and say, I can make something? Of course they're going to say that. And you know, for Panther fans, hopefully that happens. But is it, you know, Tepper? Like, let me just say this: the idea, like his history, his resume, his track record, has some people in the coaching community, agents and possible candidates, they're asking questions about Tepper. Like, is this real? Do I really want to work with him? So, you know, but it is one of 32. So, but there are more attractive jobs. Let's just say that.
Yeah.
Is this the worst team I've ever covered? I mean, it's either that or 2010. 2010, Desmond, was with misfortune of my first season on it. And it was like, oh my God, is it always going to be like this?
Baptism by fire. Yeah. That was a rough.
John Fox was like, you know, somebody asked him about why he played Tony Pike like in week 7. And he was like, you're going to have to ask the personnel department. Like, totally threw the front office under the bus. That was a bad year. This has not been fun.
No.
I remember week 1 in Atlanta, and this isn't to take any shots, but this is a true story. We're in the Mercedes-Benz Dome, and I'm watching this offense, and I just said to whoever was sitting next to me in the press box, I said, this isn't even really fun to watch. Like, this is not a captivating, dynamic offense.
Yes.
And really, even their one win against Houston, that wasn't good offense.
That was the defense.
That was a rock fight. And
sure.
So I don't know. It's been disappointing. You know, you feel for Panther fans who've had to go through this now. 6 years. You know, 6 years with Tepper and not a single playoff berth. Looked like that very first year of 2018. You remember, like they go to Pittsburgh on a Thursday night, and Cam gets drilled by TJ Watt, and it's been pretty much horse crap since.
That literally was the start of the downfall, really, because I think they lost out the rest of that season, if I'm not mistaken.
They did.
Yeah,
they did, or maybe won.
Might have won one more. Cam was out, and then from there.
No, I think you're right. They lost their last 8. Went 6-10. I think.
Yeah, and we just haven't sniffed a winning season since. And really, that was the exodus of the 2015 Panthers. At that point, Cam gets cut. They pretty much let everybody go, or they retired, except for Christian McCaffrey, who they actually gave money to, and then trade him off 2 years later or whatnot. And I was saying that the other day to somebody else too, and I got to get you out of here. David Tepper hasn't really paid anybody since he's been here in 6 years, and I hadn't really thought about it, except for Christian McCaffrey. And then they traded him off in a panic week after they fired Matt Rule. And looking back on it, it's like, why did you trade him again? I'm trying to figure out why you traded this dude for no reason, really. Like, they just kind of traded him out of here. So,
and then they held on to Brian Burns when he could have brought even more assets than McCaffrey.
The Rams have been sniffing around twice for this dude, and each time they're like, no, we're going to get him. We got him. But at this point, if you're Brian Burns, what's going to make you resign here? Like, you're going to be on your 6th head coach, like, in 6 years or whatever. Right. So it's just a mess. Joe Person, follow him on Twitter at Joe Person. Go check out that article at theathletic.com. It's him and Dianna Russini. Excellent work. Just kind of peeling back the onion on the Carolina Panthers and their and the behind the scenes. Got to get him out of here. Joe, thanks for stopping by, man.
Desmond, have a great week, buddy.
Coming up, we'll have even more here. Panther talk, college football playoffs, even a little WWE. Franchise prayers here on WTOB 980 AM and WWBG 1470 AM.